I'm Shelby Williams with Plano City Council. Council meeting is over. I've gone to pick up my daughter. I'm home, and I seem to have recycled my notes. So I'm just going to go down the agenda and do this from memory. First, in the executive session, which I can't talk about, but I can talk about the aftermath, in which we did in the special called session, there was an ethics complaint filed against Commissioner Allan Samara for supposedly for a post that was put on Smart Plano Future's Facebook page, critical of the water district and Plano's water rates. Now, the post or the ethics complaint cited city code of conduct, saying that no city official shall, I'm going from memory here, conduct themselves in a manner prejudicial to the city government or which reflects discredit upon the city. So I read that a little bit differently than the complainant, which was Larry Howe, a member of the CPRC, Comprehensive Plan Review Committee, to say that the being critical of the city, I didn't read it to mean being critical of the city government. I meant it to read prejudicial, as in to impair the performance of the city government, the ability of the city government to perform, and to reflect discredit, as in driving drunk or knocking over a bank, something to that effect. In any case, the council felt that the First Amendment was paramount here and did not move forward with any sort of ethics investigation. I will, however, say that the Smart Plano Future post, whether it was Commissioner Samara who made that post there or not, there are a couple of people who post to that site, but it doesn't matter. The post left out one glaring thing. The thrust of it was we did not see any real relief in our water rates this year. Now, it is true that we have been overpaying for water to the water district for a number of years. This goes back, way back, to a pretty bad deal that was made with the water district, where we locked in our rates at that year for water usage. Well, with conservation, improved technology, etc., we don't use as much water per capita as we used to. Yet we have been paying those high rates since, which means that we have in effect been subsidizing some of the 13 other cities in the North Texas Municipal Water District. I will say that an agreement was reached and actually ratified tonight at tonight's council meeting. Very recently, it was a Herculean effort on the part of our city, because to change this makeup, to lower our water rates and make them more equitable, required unanimous consent of all 13 member cities. So obviously, if some cities are benefiting from an effective subsidy from Plano water users and taxpayers, they're a little reluctant to change that equation, because then they're going to get hit with it. The result is a phased approach whereby our water rates in Plano get reduced over 8 years, I think it is, to a more equitable arrangement. So it's true that this year we saw little relief. That's going to improve until 8 years from now. We're going to have full relief and a much better deal going forward. And the reality is that without that phased arrangement, we never would have gotten anything done. So we moved on to the preliminary open meeting. We had interim appointments for Community Relations Commission and Parks and Recreation Planning Board. Congratulations to Lauriston Crockett on his appointment to the Parks and Rec Planning Board. We had a discussion regarding in-town homes development agreement to use up to $971,500 in TERS funds. That's Tax Increment Reinvestment Zone funds. This is where a portion of property tax revenue is set aside to make eligible public improvements to an area. This is at the site of the old First Baptist Church in downtown Plano. When this first came before council month and a half or so ago, it was denied because it was brought forth simultaneously with the proposal of a sale of land to the city. And we, at least I felt, I know some other council members felt, that the two issues were kind of tied up because they dealt with the same developer, and it was turned down at that time. In-Town Homes is requested to go up to bat again for this TERS request, and we were supportive of that coming up. Personally, in my mind, it's still not entirely decoupled, but I at least want it to be decoupled in its presentation on the agenda, and I want to consider it in the context of how we do other TERS arrangements. So that will be coming back before council at a future date. In the regular meeting, we had comments of public interest. There were several speakers on the Hoblitzall Bike Trail extension affecting Montessori Children's House. I spoke about this in my council recap from January 11th. So I'd encourage everybody to go take a look at my comments there. I started out the meeting with them, at least early on. So I'm not going to rehash that here, but you're free to look at that from January 11th, 2021. We had, there we go. Sorry, having to go through the agenda. Not my usual notes. The first item was a resolution to add the former J.C. Penney store to the Collin Creek East PID, that's Public Improvement District. The long story short, when the PID was first created, it carved out the J.C. Penney store from the PID. J.C. Penney has since said we're decommissioning that store, so we're adding that store to the PID. Easy peasy. Item number 2 was to establish the West Collin Creek Public Improvement District PID. Items 3, 4, and 5 were all applications for a 9% housing tax credit for senior independent living facilities that are proposed to be developed in the city. Now, first item, this vote was to show support for applying to the state for a tax credit for the proposed development. This was not a vote for actual rezoning or for the development itself. So what happens in the housing tax credit process is these developments for affordable housing, which really means taxpayer subsidized housing, they apply to the state and they can say, look, we want some subsidies for this because we're going to provide taxpayer subsidized housing. That's what the subsidies are, is taxpayer money. So we're going to provide affordable housing. The way they work is they have to have at least 20% of the units selling for market rate, as though there were no taxpayer subsidies, for a minimum of 20% of those. So these can range from 20% to 50%. It all depends on the development. And then if they get a letter of support from the city for this, it increases their score. And they're competing with other developments around the state for these tax dollars in order to subsidize the development project so they can lower their rates to create affordable housing. I keep using the air quotes because there are two types of things that people say when they mean affordable housing. One is housing that is affordable, housing that doesn't cost through the nose. That doesn't mean it's taxpayer subsidized, but that of course leads to the other definition, which does mean taxpayer subsidized. So I don't say affordable housing without using the air quotes. I say taxpayer subsidized housing or housing that is affordable. All three of those were for 55 and up, senior, and the first for a fully independent living community. All three of those resolutions passed, which means that the city said this meets our criteria to give it the thumbs up for them to apply to the state for the housing tax credit. Now, what that does is it gives them extra points in the state's scoring criteria. If they are approved and if they want to move forward with the development, then at some future point, they will have to come back before council and say, here's the development, here's what we want to do, here's the zoning we need, or maybe they can already build it by right and we just want to build it, and then we vote on that. Pardon me. By the way, this throat thing, it's a medical thing that's been going on more than a decade. It's not COVID, so chill out. The next item was the ratification of a contract with the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs to receive an amount not to exceed $380,000 and change in community development block grant coronavirus funds under the Texas Emergency Rental Assistance Program. Say that 3 times real fast. Long story short, this is money that was set aside by the state to assist people in making rental payments who were impacted by COVID financially. The next item, so that was $380,000 and change. The next item is a similar arrangement, but it's from the U.S. Treasury. This is federal money set aside to help people with rental and mortgage assistance who were financially impacted by COVID. This was to the tune of about $8.7 million. Both of these were ratified, they were approved. That's tax money coming back in. I'll go on I'll do a separate video later about how the equation of the states versus the federal government has been flipped on its head, because whereas the states created the federal government and are supposed to give the federal government its meaning, the federal government has amassed so much power and takes so much tax money that it now takes tax money from the state's taxpayers, and the states come begging as paupers to the federal government for their own tax money back, which is pretty perverse. But that's a whole separate video and probably an article. So next is the ratification of the water settlement. So the settlement is done. It took a lot of work on the part of city staff, city manager, the mayor, working with mayors and councils and staff from the other member cities, 13 member cities in all, including Plano in the North Texas Municipal Water District. Remember, this had to be a unanimous agreement in order to change our water contract, which we've just been locked into, and it would have gone on in perpetuity, forever and ever and ever. So thank you for everybody involved making that happen. It is going to take a number of years before we see the full benefit of that, but we are on our way. So that was ratified. The next item was to accept the resignation of Councilwoman Lily Bow as she enters her race for mayor of Plano. Again, I am fully in support of Lily. The resignation means that she will resign, she will no longer be in office once her qualified successor is placed in the seat. So she will continue to serve until the special election for place 7 is held and the winner of that election is qualified. Now, I think the terms of that race are going to be put up tomorrow, because tonight we officially called for the election. It's going to be a special election, but it's not going to be held separately. The date of the election is going to be the same date as all the other city elections, May 1st. But since that is a special election to fill an unexpired seat, it's called a special election, even though it's going to be on the same date, the same polling locations. Lastly, I'm sorry, we had a consent agenda item that was pulled out. This was to approve DART's resolution for eminent domain, or to approve eminent domain for a little bit of land along the Silver Line development path. Now, it's cutting into some property owners' land with some businesses. It doesn't actually affect the businesses themselves, except for a little bit of parking lot. But here's the thing. DART, as a quasi-governmental entity, they have the ability under state law to exercise eminent domain, but they can't do it unilaterally. They need the blessing of the city in which they want to exercise eminent domain. That means coming to us. So the resolution DART created said that they'll attempt negotiations with the property owners to purchase the land before exercising eminent domain. But I asked in the meeting, had they actually done any of that yet? Had they attempted to negotiate? The DART representatives in the meeting said no, they had not. They were waiting to get the approval to use eminent domain. It does not mean they would not have negotiated, but I asked this item to be tabled because I don't believe anybody should have the automatic leverage of having eminent domain as a go-to if negotiations don't go their way. Unfortunately, this was not tabled, and therefore we passed it. Not being tabled, I did approve it then, because this is I'm very judicious about the use of eminent domain. This is a legitimate use of eminent domain. But I do expect to see full effort in negotiating in good faith with the property owners to come to an amicable arrangement. And then the last item on the items for individual consideration was the bond election. Now, I did want to revisit this a little bit, more to refine than rehash, and here's the reason. After the council got together last time and went through all of the projects and determined our priorities, we did not then have a tabulation of what the projects we selected would add up to. And as I said in the meeting tonight, we have a fiduciary obligation to our taxpayers and our voters to do just that. We looked at the relative prioritization of everything, but while we had individually looked at the projects and the individual price tags over the course of the past few months, we did not do that as a council. Once we had said, okay, this stuff is high priority, this stuff is high priority, That's what will go into these bond resolutions. We never saw the total price tag for that until this came up tonight to put it all on the ballot. So what I wanted to do was to take a final pass through that prioritized list and say, okay, by the way, we wound up, out of $404 million proposed, we wound up with $364 million on the final bond ballot. So that's only trimming $40 million, 10%, which isn't a lot. My personal criteria list had the bond package at $228 million, which was still even higher than I was trying to accomplish. I wanted to get to the 180 some odd million number, which would not mean a tax increase in the future. But there's a lot of work we need to do, as I've also explained previously, primarily in roads, because our infrastructure's taken a beating since it was built and the warranty's up. But there are going to be $364 million worth of bond items on the ballot. There was not enough support to go through the list and further refine items. I did want to pull a few items out for inclusion as separate line items on the bond, as did Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Riccardelli. One of those was the fueling stations. Those were clubbed together under public safety because the public safety staff would be using those. And I also wanted to pull out screening walls because they're lumped in under streets. Nobody drives on screening walls. They're valuable, but they're a totally different value proposition. Unfortunately, and Deputy Mayor Pro Tem wanted to pull out the maintenance facility that's going to be built because it's a large standalone project all by itself. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough support, so 6 items will be going on to the bond package, but as I alluded to last time, I've been corrected. I thought that city officials could not advocate for or against bond packages. What I come to find out is that city resources cannot be used to advocate for or against bond measures. I can do whatever I want on this video. So I will be writing an article and probably doing a video to go through the items one at a time, give you the pros and cons of each bond measure, and give you my opinion and how I'm going to be voting, and let you make your choice. So that's it for this week's council meeting. We will be back in the very near future with more. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Shelby Williams from Plano City Council, Place 5.